We continue the conversation on Tennessee football, but from a national perspective. What are they saying about Tennessee in 2023? Quarterback Joe Milton, the SEC East, all that good stuff. We got SEC Mike joining the show here today on Locked On Vols.
You are Locked On Vols, your daily podcast on the Tennessee Volunteers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, everybody? Welcome into it, and I appreciate you guys being here on Locked On Vols. I am your host, Eric Kane. Every single day, hashtag everydayers. Appreciate you guys. 30 minutes or less, we get into a little Tennessee football content. We are a part of the Locked On Podcast Network. That is your team every single day. You know how to follow us. Subscribe to the YouTube channel for Locked On Vols. Surpassed 7,000 last week. Can't thank you enough for that. Turn those notifications on to let you know when the show is dropping. And subscribe and follow us wherever you get your audio podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Odyssey app, Apple Music, Google Music, all that type of stuff. I don't know all of them. There's so many out there, but we're on them all. So you have no excuse to miss Locked On Vols. A fun week ahead. We're going to hit up SEC Mike. That is Michael Bratton here in segment 1 and 3. I had already kind of recorded a hit with Andrew Lyon, the Locked On host for South Carolina, as we look at Tennessee's opponents around the SEC and kind of touch base with them. But interview heavy here today, but SEC Mike is going to be the bulk of the show, and let's go ahead and bring him on. It is Michael Bratton, man. What's going on? Appreciate the time.
Hey, Eric, big fan of you, big fan of the show, and of course all the work you do over at VolQuest. So it's an honor to be here, my friend. I'm doing great.
Well, ditto, man. Big fan of you. Enjoy watching and listening to you guys and all the work that you put out there on social media. You do a heck of a job. Tell us what you're doing right now. I mean, I know, of course, you got that SEC podcast, happening all the time. Every time I turn on Feinbaum, I think I see you there. Of course, it was fun catching up with you at SEC Media Days. Kind of what's going on? What's the plan for you here this offseason?
Yeah, so actually, I may be making, I don't know how much I can talk about it, but I may be on Paul Feinbaum SEC Network even a little bit more than usual leading up to Media Day, so I'm fired up about that. But, man, you know how it goes when you do a show like this, and, you're not always football, but I am, and it could get to be somewhat of a slog this time of year. So we've opened up a hotline. We've been taking questions, kind of like a Feinbaum. I mean, he's been such an inspiration to me. So we're doing that. That is really helping us push out the content. But, yeah, we've been having a ton of interviews, and just we're going to start our fall camp preview series. We're having a SEC Media Days party for fans to show up in Nashville. I'm based out of Nashville, so yeah, we're trying to stay as busy as possible, just focusing on SEC football. And I'll tell you, Eric, it's not a bad way to make a living, just sitting here talking to folks about college football.
Man, I say it all the time, and it truly, like, a lot of times it's just words, but when you sit back there and think about it, I mean, it's truly amazing that we get paid to do this. So I'm right there with you, man. And I'll have to stop by that party over there in Nashville this summer. I sign me up for a ticket of that. I want to be there for that. When you look at Tennessee, all right, I know you're based in Nashville, so you got orange everywhere you look. I get all that, but you cover the SEC and do a good job doing it. Kind of from a whole. When you look at Tennessee and you think about what Tennessee can do in 2023, what do you like? What do you dislike? Kind of what do you see this Tennessee team right now?
I mean, I don't think there is a limit, Eric, based on what Josh Heupel and company have been able to do in their short time. I always reference this, and this is not to slight the guy, because I think he does tremendous work, but it always sticks in my mind. Barrett Sallee, when Josh Heupel got hired and we had all these transfers coming out, he said, Tennessee's not going to make a bowl game, folks, for 5 years. And he was not alone. I mean, many people were thinking that. And obviously got to a bowl game year one. They got robbed of that win. It should have been a win there. And then last year, I think even the most optimistic Tennessee fans would not have envisioned 11 wins, winning an Orange Bowl. There is no reason, given what we've seen, given the additions via recruiting and transfer portal, that Tennessee can't do it again. And, short of Georgia being the most daunting Goliath in the sport, if it was any other division, I think Tennessee would be favored to win their division. So they're just at an unfortunate point to where Kirby's got that thing rolling. But at the same time, I mean, everyone looks right now, I think, at Georgia and they see Alabama 2.0, but there's a reason Nick Saban is the greatest of all time. It's hard to keep that consistent elite high level. I'm not saying Georgia's about to fall off or anything, but I can't imagine they're about to go on a 15-year run like Alabama just did. So as long as Tennessee keeps chipping away, you've got potentially one of the best quarterbacks in the country in Nico in the years to come. The future is bright. To me, it's almost all about Joe Milton and that offensive line. How do they hold up this season if you're just talking about next fall? But I think the defense is going to take a big step forward. I think the running game should be very strong. And I have all the faith in the world in the receivers they have coming back that they'll still be able to put up big numbers regardless of who that quarterback is. And I'm not out here bashing Joe Milton because that's not what I do. But I'm in that camp that is still kind of undecided about him. We've seen enough. We've seen highlights. We've seen lowlights. And, I'm not convinced that he's Hendon Hooker 2.0. But he's certainly not, Jarrett Garantano 2.0 either. So, I think he's somewhere in the middle. Is that good enough to win 10, 11 football games? We're going to find out this fall.
Yeah, I think that's completely fair. You had Joe Milton that had a record-setting rushing attack with him and a win over Vanderbilt and tons of rain, and it was kind of a weird game. And then you had a month to prepare for Clemson, who did not have two of their best players on defense. And again, not trying to take anything away from Joe Milton, but I think it's what can you do week to week to week, and we're about to find out. I'm going out of town next weekend, so I'm doing a whole lot of interviews and shows and trying to work ahead and everything. And so I've said this week already, but I think it's going to be next week when it airs. But anyway, it's stepping away from Tennessee. It's incredible to me the job that Kirby is doing right now with Georgia in terms of manipulating his team, saying, hey, everyone thinks you suck. No one thinks you're good. Everyone thinks you're going to take a step back. And then they do all these interviews after the SEC championship or, a big game at Tennessee game in conference or the national championship. And they're just like, hey, no one thought we were going to be here. Everybody thought we were going to take a step back. Everybody thought we sucked. It's like, no, we didn't. We all thought you were going to be good. Nick Saban did that for years and is still doing that. So the job that those two guys, I mean, Kirby's learning it from Saban, of course, but the job they have that not only recruits, develop, stack classes on classes, but also put that chip on their shoulder. It's really incredible. And of course, Tennessee's trying to get there, but as a football guy just watching, it's pretty remarkable to see.
Yeah, and to your point, Eric, on my show, That SEC Podcast, we hit on all the teams. So we have listeners from across the SEC, and we probably had 30 to 40 Bulldog fans. I don't know. I don't put a ton of stock in the ESPN FPI. I don't know if you do or not. Yeah. But, man, I heard from about 30 or 40 of them. Can you believe we're number 3 in the FPI? I mean, this is like weeks on weeks. They are so upset that, the disrespect that Alabama would be ranked ahead of them, that Ohio State, who they just beat, is ranked ahead of them, even though these are 2023 rankings. But to your point, I mean, they're going to have that tattooed on their chest. ESPN FPI got us number 3 in May. You know what I mean? Like, they are feeling the disrespect right now, and they're taking that cue from Kirby Smart, who I'm sure is manipulated that into saying they're going to lose 3 games by double-digit points. You know what?
It's pretty remarkable, but hey, you got to give props where props due, man. They've built some juggernauts, and Tennessee is trying to catch that right now. And I was going to ask this in segment 3 or later on in the show, but I'll go ahead and ask it now. Kind of on that note, how close do you think Tennessee is? I think the next step, in my opinion, would be, all right, you won 10 games in the regular season, not necessarily do it again, but get close to that, be in that category, get you 9 wins, 10 wins, whatever it is this year. Take another step defensively. You're not going to lead the nation in offense, but can you be top 10? Do it again, if you will. But how close is that gap from Tennessee, Georgia, Tennessee, Alabama right now, in your opinion?
I still think it's fairly wide, Eric, and I'll tell you why. To me, it's the line of scrimmage. I think that is in the SEC. That's where separation is made. And I didn't think Tennessee was there last year. And to their credit, the offensive line for much of the season was outstanding. And that really was the difference in that game in Athens. Everybody likes to talk about, Kirby, he's this defensive guru, and they shut him down, and Heupel's gimmick off. I still get people saying it's a gimmick offense. They averaged 50 points per game and ran through every team aside
Pretty
from
good
Georgia.
gimmick. Sign me up.
I know, right? So, but the difference in that one, Eric, was Jalen Carter. I mean, the man was unblockable. And that's just one of many that Georgia, that Alabama have. Now, they basically same thing could have been said about Will Anderson leading up to the season. He won defensive player in the country. Darnell Wright stonewalled him for the entire game. And that was paramount to that win over Alabama. These are the things that, true football fans know, but the casuals, you're just looking at the quarterbacks and the receiving game. So I think that is the separation. But I do think Tennessee's getting a lot better in that front seven on the defensive side of the ball to where they can kind of man up against those teams. But I still see a separation there in my mind. But it's not a wide gap. I mean, heck, they just won 11 games. And I just don't know if the offensive line will be up to that standard that it was last year. And that's probably the biggest concern I have for Tennessee heading into the season. It's not even Joe Milton, even though basically got to talk about that every time we talk about Tennessee. It's not the defense, which I think has gotten better every year under Tim Banks, and I think this is going to be his most talented defense yet of the Josh Heupel era. So I think defense is going to win him multiple games like it did last year. People don't like to – I don't know why people just overlook that, but they don't win the Pitt game. They don't win the LSU game. They don't win the Kentucky game if not for the defense that played really well in those matchups. So I think the defense is going to win in multiple games this year too.
Yeah, just the lasting memory of that defense is just going to be South Carolina, and it was so bad that day, but that's because maybe it was so late in the season. Obviously, the weight that it carried because it knocked them out of the playoffs. And again, that's fair. It was an awful day, but I think that's kind of the lasting memory of defense. But I agree with you, and certainly on the offensive line, Unero Numo for me in terms of biggest question mark is left guard, right tackle. We'll get to that here in just a moment. We got more with SEC Mike joining us here on Locked On Vols. Love the work that he does. I'm sure a lot of you guys listen to him and watch him as well. He does fantastic work, and really cool that he's joining us here on Locked On Vols. More with him coming up in segment 3 of the show. We got Andrew Lyon of Locked On South Carolina, Locked On Gamecocks coming up next as we take a look at Tennessee's opponents for the 2023 season. Hey, are you looking for a delicious snack but don't want to sacrifice taste? Well, you're not going to sacrifice taste and all that good stuff with a 100% chocolate-covered Built Bar. It's good for you, right? Only 130 calories as well. It's jam-packed with 17 grams of protein. That's Built Bar. You get a bar or a puff. But again, it's covered in 100% chocolate, so you're thinking that you're eating a candy bar. It tastes like a candy bar, but it's not a candy bar. It's got all these things that are really good for you. They got specialty flavors, cookies and cream, peanut butter brownie, churro, whatever you want. And now you can go to your local Walmart or Sam's Club and you can take them off the rack. You can order them off the rack and make your purchasing experience a whole lot easier. Plus, you can still get your specialty flavors by ordering online at Built.com. Again, 100% real dark chocolate, 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, but 17 grams of protein. Sign up today and go get them at Built.com or Walmart and Sam's Club. All right, guys, welcome back into your Wednesday edition of Locked On Vols. I'm your host, Eric Kane. Appreciate you being here. Shout out to everydayers. You know the drill. If you want to be an everydayer, come back tomorrow, and we'll slap that tag on you. Continuing on with this series for, looking at Tennessee's schedule, not necessarily a straight opponent preview, but anytime we have a locked-on host that's on the schedule, we're gonna check in with them. We're gonna see how the offseason went, how spring practice went, and we did Florida yesterday. Of course, Tennessee opens with Virginia. There's no locked-on host for Virginia. Austin P, self-explanatory. We talked to Brandon for Florida. Nobody for UTSA. And now we're going to bring in Andrew Lyon of Locked On Gamecocks for South Carolina to talk a little South Carolina. What's up, man? Appreciate you joining me.
Yeah, Eric, appreciate you having me. I know that there's going to probably be some Tennessee fans that are going to automatically be upset at the fact that I'll be talking some South Carolina football here today, but 2023, new season for both our teams, and really looking forward to what's to come for both programs.
Yeah, I mean, let's address the elephant in the room, man. I remember you and I did a crossover episode, and I think I picked Tennessee. I think the spread was 17. I picked Tennessee to cover it, maybe win by 18 or something. I think you even had Tennessee winning 24, 25, somewhere around there. I mean, we both had Tennessee winning this game handily on the road in Columbia. It's why you play the game, right? Tennessee got its tail whipped on that day, and credit South Carolina. Did that to Tennessee, knocked off Clemson, played well against Notre Dame. What happened with South Carolina at the end of the season? And, I mean, is Spencer Rattler back to being good again?
Well, Eric, I think that it's definitely a little bit complex, but the simple way to put it is I think that there was a massive change in terms of how this offense was operating. I think that it is clear that they sort of narrowed down what was a very comprehensive playbook by former offensive coordinator Marcus Satterfield, and they did that starting against Tennessee after what was a disastrous performance by the Gamecocks against Florida, which sort of spurred a massive change because, quite frankly, South Carolina at that point in the season, they were teeter-tottering on the verge of perhaps disarray in the locker room. And Shane Beamer, of course, knew that they needed to get ahead of that. And so obviously they made some sort of change behind the scenes and against Tennessee's secondary, which I know had some bad moments at certain points last year. It just happened to work out. And Spencer Rattler, I think, honestly had the game of his life that night. So I would say that Spencer Rattler still has certain things he could get better at, but I think that he definitely showed that, when you kind of let him go out there and just honestly sling the pigskin around, to put it bluntly, he could be one of the best quarterbacks still in all of college football.
Yeah, I mean, I think he showed it on that night, and of course he did some things later on in the games that followed that as South Carolina finished the season on such a high note. But there's kind of now, I mean, there's a lot of quarterbacks that are departing now from the Southeastern Conference, and we kind of have that conversation as we do every offseason. Excuse me, Jaden Daniels, KJ Jefferson, Will Rogers, Spencer Rattler, Joe Milton now, Leary of Kentucky. Kind of what is that pecking order? Is Spencer Rattler now in this conversation to where we're going to see more of him earlier in his career, to where the potential, the ceiling has always been there for him? Has he officially turned that corner, do you think? Or do you need to see it a couple more times? Or is he going to still be kind of a turnover risk?
I think, Eric, that I do want to see a little bit more consistency from Spencer Rattler, but if any reports from the spring or any indication, he has gotten along quite well with new offensive coordinator Dow Lawkins, who comes from Arkansas, but was previously in the NFL for like 16, 17 years and had some up and down stops as an offensive play caller throughout his time in the professional ranks. But he is probably more so of a guy that is going to listen to Spencer Rattler and has made it clear that he is going to cater South Carolina's offense around Spencer Rattler's strengths, which I think probably at times last year was not fully the case. And so, reports have been great about Spencer Rattler. And I think that obviously, again, in terms of sheer talent in this conference, he could be the best quarterback in the SEC. The issue with him has obviously always been consistency. And also, if you get behind a little bit, maybe say a couple scores, and he feels like that, at some point you just need to make a play happen, he's willing to throw some YOLO balls down the field, which will lead to some turnovers. So I still would like to see a couple of those areas improve. But overall, South Carolina is going to go as far as Spencer Rattler takes them in 2023, much like it was the case in the latter part of this past fall.
All right, tell me about the offseason. Big offseason acquisitions via the transfer portal, maybe a star recruit that came up and was an early enrollee in spring. What is the buzz this offseason for South Carolina?
The buzz for South Carolina surrounds mainly the tight end room in terms of off-season acquisitions. The Gamecocks got starting tight end Trey Knox from Arkansas, and they also got an underrated tight end pickup from Western Kentucky and Joshua Simon, who's a South Carolina native. And these two guys are going to be sure fixtures in South Carolina's offense this coming football season. So those guys, you're going to see a lot more on this offense. But honestly, Eric, the big story for South Carolina hasn't really been maybe the guys they've added, although the 2023 class was quite good for the Gamecocks. The big story has really been the guys that they have lost. They lost over 100 career starts on the offensive line. They're only returning one starter in their defensive front on defense. And, of course, you lose guys like Darius Rush and Cam Smith to the NFL. It's not very often you got two top 5 round cornerbacks on your roster. So for South Carolina, this is a little bit of a transition year in terms of their roster. You're starting to see a lot more of Shane Beamer's guys now come in. And while talented, obviously, a lot of them are very young. And in the SEC, they'll chew you up and spit you out every given week if you are a true freshman playing in this league. So I think South Carolina is going to be relying on a lot more true freshmen probably in there too deep and on special teams this next season. And that's what's going to make it much more interesting when they have those games that could make or break sort of how the entire fall unfolds for South Carolina.
Man, I pulled up South Carolina's schedule, and you're right. I mean, it'll pick you up and spit you out. That schedule, you start off with North Carolina, which has a Heisman caliber quarterback, #1 NFL draft caliber quarterback. You got Furman after that. Then you're at Georgia, Mississippi State, which should be a dub at home, at Tennessee. That's your first 5 games. I mean, goodness. Then you're off.
Yeah.
You host Florida, which at this point, I mean, that should be a South Carolina win potentially. At Missouri, at Texas A&M and College Station. You got Jacksonville State, which I would imagine will be homecoming. Vanderbilt should win that one. Kentucky's going to be a challenge, of course, and then Clemson in the year. But, man, that first 5 games versus North Carolina, at Georgia, at Tennessee, I mean, that is a challenging way to kick off your slate. No, yeah, you still got to take on A&M, Florida, Kentucky, and then end with Clemson.
Yeah, no, I think I saw something earlier this offseason, Eric, where Phil Steele actually had someone go and compile all the win-loss records for teams' 2023 opponents on the schedule. And in terms of the toughest schedule in all college football, the Gamecocks ranked #1 in that category in terms of their opponents' overall win-loss record. I think all their non-conference opponents won at least 9 games this past season. So it is absolutely daunting. And September is just brutal. 3 games away from home. You mentioned North Carolina and Charlotte. Obviously, Georgia, the back-to-back national champs. It's already tough enough to beat them already, but you tried to do it now in Athens. That is a very daunting task. And then Tennessee, which South Carolina fans are not naive. They all know that Tennessee is going to be out for blood that weekend. They're going to want to hang 50-plus on South Carolina and probably try to double what South Carolina did, honestly, this past season.
That'll be tough. So, it'll be tough, but they'll try.
yeah, absolutely. But yeah, I mean, September's daunting. And then, of course, you look at those last 2 games, Kentucky and Clemson. Those are going to be 2 really tough games because of where they're slotted. Then Missouri, Texas A&M. You haven't beat Missouri since 2019. Texas A&M, I think they'll be improved this year with new offensive coordinator Bobby Petrino. So it's just, 3 different stretches of this schedule, especially that September stretch where it's just like, you got to try to find a way to probably get 1 or 2 of those games that a lot of people aren't going to expect you to get. Otherwise, you could very likely take a step back in the win-loss column this season.
Yeah, I think that game at home against Florida, because, I mean, it's going to be a challenge. Not saying South Carolina can't win this, but obviously, Tennessee's good, going to be playing at home and all that. It's going to be tough to win on the road at Neyland. So, I feel like you, of course, got to get Mississippi State. You need to beat North Carolina at the top, and then you really need to take care of business against Florida at home, and then of course Missouri on the road, because that can build you some if you drop A&M, if you drop Kentucky potentially like that. Those are some of those games I feel like South Carolina has got to win early on. All right, man. Last thing I got for you. This will be year number 3 for Shane Beamer. Obviously, there's a lot to be happy about. The progress. In the first couple of years, couple big wins. What's the fan base like right now? What's the still in the honeymoon phase maybe with Shane Beamer? Because again, he's done some things to get excited about.
Yeah, no, Eric, the fan base is overjoyed and over the moon about the Shane Beamer era so far here in Columbia, and for very good reason. I mean, Shane Beamer came to Columbia to take over a program that had just only won 2 games in the 2020 COVID-19 SEC-laden schedule. And so South Carolina's come a long ways from where they were just 3 years ago. But the other thing is the fan base still, I think, for the most part, understands that, there's still more steps that needs to be taken. And Shane Beamer does a good job, in my opinion, when he talks to me of reminding the fans that, look, we're not there yet. We still got a ways to go in terms of trying to get to where he wants the program to be at. The recruiting at the best levels that they've seen since the Steve Spurrier years back in 2007, especially. And the on-the-field product, I mean, so far, Shane Beamer has proven everybody wrong. Now, is it fair to say that, he needs to keep on adding to that win column and maybe he has to get 9 wins this season? I don't fully think so, because the SEC East, I think, is going to be a lot tougher this year. But I think that fans, again, for the most part, Shane Beamer, he's bought a lot of time. He's bought a lot of street cred with Gamecock fans. And I think that Shane Beamer is here to stay long-term in the SEC.
He's Andrew Lyon. He does a fantastic job over at Locked On Gamecocks. Give him a follow at ALYON_SC on Twitter. Andrew, appreciate it, man. Thanks so much.
Appreciate it, Eric.
All right, that'll conclude our look around the SEC, look around Tennessee's schedule here for today. What's coming up next? Well, you're in for a treat. SEC Mike will join us here to tie a bow on Wednesday's show. This is Locked On Vols. We are rolling right along here on this Wednesday edition of Locked On Vols. Hope you guys are enjoying it. I sure am. And going to welcome back to the show. He was here in segment 1. He's going to take us to the finish line again here today. It's SEC Mike. Having a whole lot of fun, man, talking Tennessee, the SEC, all that good stuff. When you were viewing Tennessee in terms of spring practice wrapped up a couple weeks ago, the orange and white game, watch that and everything. What were some of your bigger takeaways maybe? I know you can't take away a lot from watching the orange and white game, but kind of what did you like from Tennessee while watching that?
I think the number one thing was Cam Seldon. There's someone that I had heard a lot about that, a little diamond in a rough they found, I believe, up there in Virginia as an athlete, could play multiple positions, playing running back. Just dynamic athlete. And I think that's something that Tennessee maybe has been missing. I mean, they sort of had a players, I don't want to say quite similar, but, they got a ton out of Princeton Fant, who, I didn't think, I didn't think he was a player at all. And yet Josh Heupel turned him into a weapon. So I'm looking at Seldon being basically a better version of that. I'm just sitting here daydreaming what he can do, almost like a Deebo Samuel type in that offense. It's scary to think about. How could you not be impressed with some of the throws Nico made? Of course, everyone knows the play I'm referencing where it breaks out of the pocket and just in perfect stride throws a strike that when you see a play like that, you say, okay, I see why he's a 5-star. You know what I mean? So not sitting here saying he's going to be your day one starter, because I don't think that's anywhere close to reality. But Tennessee should feel great about the backup quarterback. And God forbid if anything happens to Joe Milton, I don't think there would be a massive drop-off. I think that's great news if I'm a Tennessee fan. But really, I like to see some of the playmaking in the defensive secondary as well. They were stepping up and making plays. And like you referenced earlier, that South Carolina game, I mean, that's just going to stick in people's craw until they see much better pass defense. And you could reference Florida too. I mean, Anthony Richardson just carved them up. That was the typical Tennessee Florida game, wasn't it? Where you're feeling good about it, you get some momentum, and then you just, I don't know about you, Eric, but I just assumed that Anthony Richardson was just going to uncork a 60-yard Hail Mary that 3 Gators were going to catch while Tennessee players were like falling down or something. Like, I just knew that was going to happen. So thankfully that did for Tennessee fans. But I think those were my main takeaways: Cam Seldon, Nico, and some of the young talent they have in the secondary.
We were sitting up there in that press box during Tennessee and Florida back in September this past fall. And, Tennessee was winning by, I want to say, 21, maybe it was 17. It was a couple scores. And there was about 4 minutes and change left. And, if you're sitting up in a press box, you can go down with a couple minutes left in the game. That way you can shoot the video of the walk-off and all that. But so a lot of the media personnel left. And me and Adam Sparks, he's sitting a couple of chairs down from me. And, Florida scores. And he looks at me and said, they're going to lose, aren't they? And I'm like, no, there's not enough time. There's no way they're going to lose. And they just kept chipping away. And I'm like, you saw Tennessee back in 2017 just give Florida the win in the swamp and nearly did it again. But Tennessee won that game, and it was a big tone setter for the season. And I think the same can be said for this upcoming season as we branch out a little bit and talk SEC. Florida, I think FanDuel's got Florida like at 5.5 wins, and sprint to the over there. They're going to win 7 games, I believe, but it's not going to be a great season. But Florida's a place that's extremely hard to play in general, especially for Tennessee, and that's coming in week 3. Of course, there's going to be more challenging games on the schedule. South Carolina 2 weeks after that, A&M, Alabama, Kentucky, Georgia, of course. How big is that Florida game for Tennessee right out of the gate in week 3 this fall?
I think it's the biggest game on the schedule. And to your point, I'm not sitting here saying Florida really is that good. And I'm certainly not suggesting they're better than Alabama, Georgia, Texas A&M, which I think will have a big bounce back year, South Carolina, Kentucky. I mean, they may be worse than all of those, but that's to the point. You cannot drop that game to Florida if you're going to have another 10-win season. I just don't see it. So I think that's paramount, and I think, it's not going – I don't predict the games this far out, Eric, but I could certainly see Florida losing week 1 to Utah on the road, defending Pac-12 champs. I mean, I think everybody and their mother is going to be picking Tennessee to win in the swamp, and we've all been there before. That's a very dangerous place to be. I don't think Billy Napier is quite as bad as, his record indicates last year, but I'm just not confident in what he had to work with this fall. And they sent 6 players to the NFL, including the number 4 overall pick, and they come out with a losing record. So maybe he is bad. I mean, I've heard it. I've heard he's Butch Jones 2.0. We'll see. I know his Louisiana team, though, and again, I realize competition is not quite the same, but they took a big year 2 jump.
Yeah.
So can they do that again? I certainly think they can. I love their running backs, Etienne and Johnson. I think that's probably the best combo of running backs in the SEC. So there's reasons to be scared. I mean, they're going to round up the clock. They're going to limit possessions for Tennessee. If Joe Milton struggles on the road, I mean, certainly I think Florida can win that game. I don't think they should, though. So that's kind of why I think it's such a big game, because if Tennessee drops that game, I think doubt starts to set in. And when you got a much difficult matchups upcoming, if you're already losing to a team like Florida, which is still trying to find its footing under Billy Napier, that's just not a great sign for what Tennessee can do this fall.
I would agree. With all that. You look at Georgia. Last thing I'll ask you. You look at Georgia. They're recruiting class after recruiting class after recruiting class. They're in great shape, and from a talent perspective, they're getting an upgraded quarterback. Now, overall, Stetson Bennett turned into a playmaker there towards the end, of course. But Carson Beck, is bigger, faster, stronger, has a better arm, all that type of stuff. So it's obviously still going to be a challenge. You look at the quarterback position at Alabama. Again, the roster, they just brought in probably their best, Saban's best recruiting class ever. Looking good in terms of, the blocking and tackling line of scrimmage. But Ty Simpson, Jalen Milroe, now bringing in Tyler Buckner to reunite with Tommy Rees as the offensive coordinator from Notre Dame. What do you make of the quarterback situation at Alabama and kind of looking ahead to the third Saturday in October?
Well, you referenced, me being on Paul Feinbaum a lot. I got on there, I think, one of the latest times when Alabama hired Tommy Rees. I said, well, this is the death of Nick Saban's dynasty if this is how far we've fallen, because I got no respect for Tommy Rees. I mean, I thought that was a joke. They struck out on many offensive coordinators. I don't know that those offensive coordinators really are dying to go work for Nick Saban after what Lane Kiffin has told people. So I don't know. That was disturbing, the fact that they had to get Tyler Buckner, a guy that Tommy Rees recruited over at Notre Dame. Now he's good enough for Alabama. I just don't see it. Ty Simpson, I thought the world of him coming out of high school. I still would not be stunned if he's the starting quarterback. But, Jalen Milroe's got that different skill set to where maybe a poor man's Jalen Hurts is probably what I'd call him. But, heck, Jalen Hurts was pretty good down there at Alabama. So it's fascinating to see what they've got down there. But I think that's further evidence, Eric, that, they have taken a step back. And it seems like every year, for as good as Alabama recruits, it seems like they're dependent on transfers. And I don't get it. I mean, it's year after year after year. I mean, heck, they had to go to Vanderbilt, Eric, to get an offensive lineman to shore up their line, which was not even that good of a line. They have to go to Ohio State and Georgia to get receivers. And if those guys get hurt, their offense is totally ineffective. I mean, they probably were an 8-4 team, 7-5, maybe even without Bryce Young. And of course, he's gone. So I'm not sitting here suggesting Alabama's going to fall off quite that much, but I mean, I don't even consider them the favorites in the West. I think they're more likely to be third in the West than they are to win it. I'm pretty down on Alabama, in particular the defense. I mean, the defense has not been the same since Kirby Smart left. So we got to start now that Kirby has won 2 national championships. I think it's fair to sit here and wonder how much of that Alabama dominance. Certainly, let's not discredit Nick Saban. I'm not crazy, but how much of that it was Kirby Smart, and maybe he's just, the prodigy of the defensive mind there at Alabama and now at Georgia. So that is something that I'm sitting here pondering myself as Alabama's defense just has not been the same and this is not a 1-year deal. This is about 3 or 4 seasons now. We have seen a sharp decline with Alabama's defense.
Yeah, I would agree. It looks different. Maybe Kevin Steele will bring a little bit more of that old school back this year. We'll have to see. Out the door, Mike. If it's not Alabama, I would assume it's LSU, and then probably A&M is who you like better than Alabama in the West.
Yeah, certainly LSU. I think they're the team to beat, and I know they even play in Tuscaloosa. I think that's a game. That's a classic Nick Saban where we're discounted. They beat us last year, revenge type. I could certainly see Alabama beating LSU. I don't think that's a stretch to say, but I just think that the rest of the way, I think LSU is probably going to be the more dominant team all season long. So, yeah, I do like A&M, but again, I don't have enough faith in Jimbo Fisher to predict them over Alabama, but it would not stun me either. They get that game is in College Station, Alabama at A&M. Last time it was there, A&M won. They should have beat them last year, but Jimbo's horrible play calling with the game on the line, back shoulder throw out of bounds. I mean, it was a thing of beauty. It looked like a play Derek Dooley would draw up or something. But yeah, I mean, that was god awful. But A&M's got all the talent in the world. There's no excuse. Year 6, if they're not top 3 in the West, I'd fire Jimbo. I would have fired Jimbo already, but it's not my $90 million to light on fire. You know what?
It's one of those situations where if it was last year at $71 million, I think this year it's going to be $56 million. It's like it's going to be a ton. So if you don't want them, just what's $20 million, right? When you're a bunch of billionaires. That SEC podcast where you can listen to Mike Bratton. That's SEC Mike, man. Really appreciate you for coming on. Like I said, big fan of your work, man. And we'll definitely have to catch up in Nashville this summer when we come down for SEC Media Days. Yeah,
anytime, man. I'm here whenever you need me.
All right, man. That is SEC Mike. Appreciate it, buddy. Have a good day.
All right.
Great stuff there, man. Wow, this has been a really, really fun episode. Kind of, starting with SEC Mike and segment 1, segment 3, talking with Andrew there in segment number 2. Hope you guys enjoyed it. It's been fun for me. And we'll come back tomorrow, do a little Locked On Vols for your Thursday edition. Of course, we're always talking Tennessee football. We'll continue to look at Tennessee's opponents for the 2023 schedule. All that and more. Shout out to everydayers. Couldn't do this without you. Become an everydayer. Hey, show up tomorrow and subscribe on YouTube to Locked On Vols and wherever you get your audio podcast. For Michael Bratton, for Andrew Lyon, I'm Eric Kane. Thanks so much for listening and watching a little Locked On Vols here on a Wednesday.